Okay, I think that Buehler probably has a better chance than most recent Republican nominees for governor. I think he's, for one thing, I think he's going to have a strong campaign. I think he's starting early. I think that's going to help him. But I think that he could run a good race if he can get past the Republican primary, which I think could be problematic if the more conservative element comes forward with a candidate. But I think in the general election, I think what he's going to have to do, which is what a Republican is going to have to do now in Oregon to win a race, is that they're dealing with a minority political party. And that is, the state has been trending Democratic. One example I think would be Salem. When I lived in Oregon now for 30 years, and when I first moved here, I lived in Salem for a few years. It was definitely Republican. But in 30 years, I've noticed that Salem itself is Democratic. Marion County tends to be majority Republican, but the Republican vote makes it a majority. It's coming from the outside areas, the smaller cities, the suburbs. But the city of Salem is voting consistently Democratic, which did not do 30 years ago. And so the state has changed. I had an interesting little bit of humor here in class. I was teaching a class in political parties and elections about a year ago, and I pointed out to my students, in 2000 there were 101,000 registered Republicans in Multnomah County. Now there are 70,000. So where did the other 30,000 Republicans go? We had a class discussion about it. Anyway, they said, well, let's see, there are three options. They moved to the suburbs, or they converted to becoming other party members, or they died. And I'd had the class, well, let's have a show of hands, and died was the winner. But the problem is that this was an indication the Republican Party has actually lost registered voters in one of the fastest growing counties in the state. And that is unusual, but that's a problem. The Republican Party has been declining. It's losing in the demographic areas that are growing in Oregon are not growing Republican. And so that is a problem. Any Republican running for governor is going to face that difficulty. I think it caught it with Gordon Smith. When he ran earlier on, he was running in a state in which the percentage of Republicans was higher than it was when he finally ended up losing his last election. And so I think that is a factor. I get the impression that watching some of these races for governor that they're not high profile to a lot of voters. They're not thinking about them. They're thinking about other things, perhaps ballot measures, which generally are the ones that generate the most interest, or president, or maybe a U.S. Senate race. But increasingly, if you find a low-profile race, people will fall back on political party, which is what happened, as I mentioned earlier, in the presidential race. And so Buehler can win this. Now, we do have a recent precedent. Dennis Richardson was elected Secretary of State, a Republican, winning a statewide race. I think what worked for him was it was a low-profile race. Secretary of State is not the race that most people think about. The incumbent did not run. The Democrats, three of them ran. I noticed the undecided vote was close to a third on the eve of the Democratic primary. So the winner was not all that well known statewide. And Richardson at least had the exposure of a previous statewide campaign, which I think is what carried him.